The Young and the Restless Spoilers. The shadows of Genoa City were growing longer, and in their depths, a new kind of danger was beginning to stir. The latest revelations from The Young and the Restless hinted that Claire Newman was about to shift from pawn to predator, and her first target could very well be Audra Cortez, now living under the name Audra Charles. What began as an uneasy alliance was turning into a psychological war, and Claire seemed ready to use one of the oldest weapons in the book: blackmail. Holden Novak's quiet confession had changed everything. For months, he had been walking a tightrope of loyalty, torn between protecting Audra's secret and staying true to his conscience. The truth, as it turned out, was far more sordid than anyone in Genoa City suspected. Years ago, while working behind the bar at the Shadow Room in Los Angeles, Holden had covered up a crime that could have destroyed Audra's life. Audra, still known then as Audra Cortez, had stolen a wallet from a drunk art collector, a man who had promised to showcase her work in an upcoming gallery exhibition. But inside that wallet was more than cash or cards. It contained a cashier's check worth $500,000. When the theft was discovered, the fallout was immediate, but the culprit had vanished without a trace. Audra had fled California overnight, reinventing herself as Audra Charles. To cover her tracks and silence Holden, she wired him $100,000. A gesture he now realized was more of a bribe than gratitude. The two had kept the secret buried for years, bound together by guilt and necessity. But Holden's recent confession to Claire had cracked the wall of silence. Claire, ever perceptive and far more calculating than she appeared, recognized the power of what she now held in her hands. The knowledge alone could ruin Audra, not just professionally, but personally. In a city like Genoa, where reputation was currency, blackmail was not just a weapon, it was leverage. Claire understood that exposing Audra's theft could destroy her standing in Victor Newman's inner circle. Audra had spent months aligning herself with power, manipulating corporate deals, seducing allies, and burying her past beneath layers of ambition. But the stolen check could undo it all. If the story ever reached the light, it wouldn't just stain her, it would expose how she had built her entire empire on a lie. The real question was whether Claire would follow through. The younger Newman had learned enough from her family to understand that information was more valuable than revenge. If used correctly, this secret could buy her freedom, protection, or even influence within Newman Enterprises. But Claire also had something Audra didn't: access to Victor's resources. The Newman patriarch's private intelligence network was legendary: investigators, data analysts, and operatives who could uncover any secret, no matter how deeply buried. If Claire decided to unleash that force, Audra's past in Los Angeles wouldn't stay hidden for long. The missing piece of the puzzle was the identity of the man whose wallet Audra had stolen. Though Holden's memory was hazy, there were hints that the man wasn't just a random patron. He was connected to the art world, someone influential enough that his silence had been purchased at a steep price. Claire's curiosity about him could easily lead her to reopen a case everyone thought had gone cold. And once Victor's detectives got involved, it would be only a matter of time before names, dates, and financial records started surfacing. What made this storyline even more tantalizing was the emotional complexity behind it. Audra's theft wasn't just a crime, it was a desperate act by a woman who had been overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. She had clawed her way to power through manipulation and survival, and now the very foundation of that survival was about to crack. Claire, meanwhile, had her own scars, her own sense of betrayal. The idea of turning Audra's darkest secret into a weapon must have been intoxicating. But the decision carried consequences. If Claire exposed Audra, she would gain leverage, but she would also inherit her enemies. And then there was Victor. If he learned what Audra had done, his response would be swift and merciless. He had tolerated deception before, but never theft, and certainly not when it threatened the Newman name. He could easily use the information to tighten his control over both women, turning Claire into an informant and Audra into a pawn. In Victor's hands, this wouldn't just be a scandal, it would become a business opportunity. He could manipulate corporate partnerships, weaponize reputations, and remind everyone that in Genoa City, power was never given freely, it was taken and traded. The next moves were unpredictable. Would Claire confront Audra directly, savoring the fear in her rival's eyes? Would she take the information to Victor and use it as a bargaining chip to strengthen her own position? Or would she hold it close, waiting for the perfect moment to strike when Audra least expected it? Whatever the choice, one thing was certain: once the truth about the stolen check resurfaced, no one involved would come out unscathed. The stage was set for one of the young and the restless most compelling showdowns, a psychological duel between two women bound by ambition and betrayal, with the shadow of Victor Newman looming over them both. In Genoa City, secrets were never buried forever, and redemption was just another word for leverage. The only question now was who would pull the trigger first, the thief who built her empire on lies, or the daughter who finally learned how to weaponize the truth. When the whispers about Audra Cortez began circulating once again in the hallways of Genoa City, they carried a weight that even she, with her perfectly measured poise, could not silence. For years, Audra had built her reputation on charm, intellect, and a carefully cultivated aura of mystery. But secrets, no matter how elegantly wrapped, had a way of unraveling under pressure. It was supposed to be a simple past, tucked neatly away in another country, under another name, in another life. Yet destiny, or perhaps karma, had other plans. Her name had been spoken again, not as Audra Charles, the ambitious executive known for her partnerships and boardroom brilliance, but as Audra Cortez, the woman who once walked the fine line between genius and fraud, leaving behind a trail of whispers about a missing $500,000 and a scandal that could have destroyed her career before it ever began. That name, uttered in the wrong company, could undo everything. And that company, as it turned out, was Claire Grace. Claire was not the naive, eager young woman most people mistook her for. Beneath her quiet grace and calculated smile was a mind as sharp as Victor Newman's himself, a mind trained to observe, to strategize, to exploit the smallest crack in someone's armor. She had grown up in the shadow of power, in a family where every gesture was scrutinized, every word carried consequence. She had watched alliances rise and fall like tides, and she had learned that the most effective weapons were not forged from steel but from secrets. When she crossed paths with Audra, she saw not an adversary, but an opportunity. An opening in the armor of one of Genoa City's most guarded figures. The story of Audra Cortez fascinated her. It was not just the scandalous whisper about the stolen money or the mysterious disappearance of her supposed benefactor, it was the sheer audacity of reinventing oneself so flawlessly that no one dared to question it. Claire intended to question it. It started innocently, with polite curiosity cloaked in admiration. Claire approached Audra under the guise of artistic collaboration, feigning interest in her background as if conducting a subtle character study. Research, she'd say to anyone who asked why she was so taken by Audra's history. But in reality, it was reconnaissance. It didn't take long for her to connect the dots: old news clippings, a grant that disappeared without trace, a patron whose name was erased from records, and a trail of financial transfers ending in silence. It all led back to Audra Cortez, a name Claire now carried like a loaded gun waiting for the right moment to fire. Holden, ever the observer, had been the first to sense the coming storm. His involvement was peripheral, almost accidental, yet crucial. Once an ally of Audra's during her earlier years, Holden knew more than he admitted. In a rare moment of unguarded honesty, he mentioned to Claire something about the wallet incident, a phrase that carried the chill of unfinished business. Holden hadn't meant to betray a confidence. He had only wanted to warn Claire about getting too close to someone as volatile as Audra. But to Claire, that slip was a revelation. The wallet incident was not merely a rumor, it was evidence of a cover-up, a $500,000 theft wrapped in charm and clever accounting. And if Holden knew, others might too. The power of such knowledge was intoxicating. Claire knew exactly how to use it. The next time Claire and Audra crossed paths, the energy in the room shifted. The poised, self-assured Audra, accustomed to controlling every narrative, suddenly found herself on unfamiliar terrain. Claire's gaze lingered too long, her smile a fraction too measured, her tone laced with quiet knowing. When she addressed her as Audra Cortez, it wasn't an accident, it was an execution. The name landed like a blade across Audra's composure, slicing through the illusion she had spent years maintaining. For a brief second, the room seemed to hold its breath. Audra's fingers tightened around her glass, and her usually velvet-smooth voice faltered, just enough for Claire to notice. The confrontation was subtle, almost intimate. Claire didn't accuse, she insinuated. She mentioned Holden's story of the wallet disaster as if it were an amusing anecdote, letting the implication bloom in the air like poison. And when Audra attempted to dismiss it with her trademark calm, Claire leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a whisper that only the guilty could fully understand. She knew about the money. About the missing $500,000, and she hinted that the rightful owner might still be looking for answers. That was the moment Audra realized this wasn't idle gossip. Someone had done their homework. Panic, though expertly hidden, began to eat away at her. Claire's precision was surgical. She played her cards not to destroy but to destabilize. She didn't need to expose Audra to the public, she only needed to let her know that exposure was possible. That kind of fear lingered, it corroded confidence, and it made even the strongest woman question every alliance. Claire wasn't bluffing, or at least she made it impossible for Audra to know whether she was. The mention of Victor Newman's name sealed it. Victor had the resources to uncover anything, and if Claire truly intended to bring her grandfather into this, Audra's carefully reconstructed identity could collapse overnight. In the days that followed, Audra's behavior changed in ways too subtle for most to detect, but not for Claire. There were cancellations, calls made and quickly ended, glances over the shoulder at every public event. Claire had accomplished what she wanted, the seed of uncertainty had taken root. Yet she didn't stop there. She wanted to push further, to see how far Audra would go to protect her secret. Holden's accidental confession had given her the first clue, but now she wanted the full story. She watched as Audra tried to maintain her usual elegance, making appearances, closing deals, pretending the past was nothing but smoke. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. Every time someone mentioned Victor's name or a financial report crossed her desk, she flinched almost imperceptibly. The tension between the two women became the unspoken talk of Genoa City's inner circles. Those who didn't know the details simply sensed a power struggle, but those attuned to the subtle dynamics of influence could feel that something more sinister was unfolding. Claire, outwardly calm, had begun to manipulate the social currents around Audra. Invitations would suddenly not arrive, whispers about her loyalty would circulate, and potential collaborators would find themselves distracted by warnings that came from no identifiable source. It was elegant sabotage, bloodless, quiet, but devastatingly effective. Audra, meanwhile, was running out of options. Leaving town would mean admitting defeat, but staying risked exposure. Her nights were restless, haunted by the image of that smirk on Claire's face when she uttered the name Cortez. Every instinct told her to fight back, but against whom? Claire had no official accusation, no concrete proof, just insinuations and a name that could destroy her if it reached the wrong ears. Audra began to retrace her own past, trying to recall what trail she might have left behind. The $500,000? Where had the final transfers gone? Was there anyone left who could link her to the disappearance? The thought of Victor Newman's investigators digging into her past made her pulse quicken. She had faced boardroom rivals and political enemies before, but never someone like Claire, young, unassuming, yet utterly merciless. When Holden realized how his words had been weaponized, guilt gnawed at him. He tried to warn Audra, but by then the damage had been done. Claire's web was already tightening. Every attempt at reconciliation or retreat seemed to fall into her trap. It wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about dominance, about teaching a woman who had thrived on manipulation what it felt like to be outmaneuvered. Claire wasn't interested in exposing Audra to the world. She wanted her to live with the fear of it, to wake each morning knowing that one whisper could undo her. Rumors eventually began to surface that Audra was planning to leave Genoa City under the pretense of a business expansion. Those closest to her suspected the truth: she was running. But Claire was not satisfied. She ensured that the escape would not be easy. A few strategic leaks, a well-timed conversation with one of Victor's aides, and suddenly the Newman family's curiosity about Audra Cortez was piqued. Once that curiosity ignited, there was no stopping it. Victor did not tolerate secrets among his associates, especially ones tied to theft or deception. By the time Audra realized how deep Claire's influence ran, it was too late. Her allies began to distance themselves, her calls went unanswered, and whispers of an internal investigation spread through the corridors of Newman Media. She was trapped in the same kind of web she had once spun for others, a web woven from ambition, deceit, and fear. And through it all, Claire remained composed, offering a sympathetic smile whenever their paths crossed, as if to say, it didn't have to be this way. In the end, Audra's past caught up not because of evidence, but because of perception. In Genoa City, perception was more powerful than truth. Claire had learned that from the best, her grandfather. Audra could disappear, change her name again, start over somewhere else, but the shadow of Claire's quiet war would follow her. And somewhere, in the silence of a darkened office overlooking the city, Claire would watch the lights flicker in the distance and allow herself a small, satisfied breath. She had not merely defeated Audra Cortez, she had dismantled the illusion she lived behind. Yet even victory has a cost. As Claire looked into the mirror that night, she saw something unsettling in her own reflection, a hint of the same ruthlessness that had once defined the woman she just destroyed. Genoa City had a way of transforming its brightest into its most dangerous. And as the night stretched on, it became clear that this was not the end of a rivalry but the beginning of a new era of quiet wars, wars fought not with weapons or press conferences, but with whispers, secrets, and the power of knowing just enough to ruin someone completely.